Hi, everyone, and welcome to today's panel discussion for GAIN, Girls Are Investors. GAIN was set up, as many of you will know, in 2019 to encourage more young women to apply to the industry. And today, we hope to inspire even more of you as we discuss why investing is an art and not a science. So I'm very fortunate to be joined by an esteemed group of panelists. I'm, just by way of introduction, Charlotte, I'm one of the trustees of GAIN and a co-founder of the charity. I also work as a fund manager at Troy Asset Management, where I run an ethical mandate and a multi-asset mandate. But just in the theme of today's discussion, I did a languages degree where I studied French and Latin. So hopefully that casts a little bit of doubt over any misconceptions that this might be a science and not an art. But we're very lucky to be joined here by Ellen, Lucy, Amy, and Victoria. And I'm just going to ask each of them briefly in turn to introduce themselves, what they do, where they do it, where they invest, and also be very interested to hear from everyone one thing that they do when they're not working, just to show that this is a multifaceted job that requires people who have lots of different interests. So I might start with Ellen because I've given her some pre-warning on the latter part of the question, but thanks so much, Ellen, and interested to hear your introductory remarks.
Thanks, Charlotte. Yes, so my background is mostly private equity. I have over 15 years of private equity experience, but it goes from venture capital to large buyout. And what I do through my own company is going in-house when there's a gap in the team or too much work in a private equity fund or a family office or a venture fund. And then I take on the role of an investor. So I've seen a lot of different investment roles. I've also worked for some large groups like Capital Dynamics and Partners Group, where I was on the co-investment team and on the secondaries team, respectively. So I also have that broad view of the market. My career started with an internship in private equity, but then was a little bit different, where I worked for the government and financial markets, became a lobbyist for the banks, and via that route then came back into banking for private equity and then back into private equity. So yeah, you can go via a lot of different routes. And one of my hobbies that I just spoke to Charlotte about as well is surfing. Even if it's cold weather, I go out. So yeah, I have a lot of fun in my free time too.
Amazing. December surfing. Thanks so much, Ellen, and really interesting. We're definitely going to come back to this sort of non-linear career path as well, because I think this is really important to stress that there's no one way to do this. But Lucy, first of all, love to hear your introduction as well.
Hi everyone, I'm Lucy. I work at a company called Canaccord Asset Management, where I manage a venture capital trust, and we invest in UK small companies. In terms of free time, that does sound nice. I've got a 1-year-old and a 4-year-old, so there isn't too much of that at the moment. But that's where my creative side, I guess, comes out. My passions are interior design and cooking. And floristry and yeah, so when I have some time, I like to do those things.
Thanks, Lucy. Can definitely relate to that as well. Amy, love to hear your background and what you do, where you do it.
Yeah, thanks. Hi, everyone. And in that spirit of a very non-linear career path, I feel like I definitely embodied that. So I was an academic in the first half of my career in terms of, completing a PhD in neuroscience of all places, all things as well at Oxford. And then it came to realize that technology is super cool. How do I get closer to it? And how do we bring technologies and all these research that you do in academia out into the real world? And that's really how I stumbled upon investing and venture capital. So currently I'm a venture investor. I'm based in Munich, actually, and I focus exclusively on healthcare, life science, biopharma, and of the likes. And again, in that spirit of understanding the science, but how do we bring it into the market? And there's a lot of art and science, I suppose, that goes along with this.
Great, thanks, Amy. And I'm not going to let you off the hook, and I'd love to hear what you do in your
Oh,
free
yeah, of
time as
course.
well.
The fun part of this, the fun part of the job. I mean, I enjoy it very much. In terms of outside outside of venture capital, I'm an avid tennis player. So whether it's rain or shine, it's not very fun in the rain, but you can still play tennis. So very much happy to play on the court anytime.
Great, thanks so much. And Victoria, thank you.
Hi, everyone. Thanks very much for having me on today. So I work as Director of Private Client Relations at a UK-based lower mid-market private equity firm called Maven Capital Partners. So we also manage a series of venture capitalist trusts and MBOs, it's management buyout funds. So these are private market funds. I work in a division of the firm where I work on the fundraising side. So I'm talking to UK-based private clients, so high net worth individuals who we give the opportunity to co-invest alongside our other institutional investors. So that's sort of bigger, more typical corporate private equity investors. I've been doing that for about the last 7 or 8 years, 8 years. Prior to that, I was in asset management. So I also had a little bit of a career pivot. I worked in institutional sales in asset management. So I've sort of always been on the fundraising side, but within finance, I've also sort of had a convoluted journey around that, which I'm happy to talk more about later. In terms of sort of outside the office, a bit like Lucy, my hobbies are a distant memory because I have a not quite 2-year-old and a miniature dachshund. So I spend most of my time separating them, which is a full-time job in itself. But yes, hopefully one day I will get back into the gym and theatre and reading, all those wonderful things that you do when you're not being a parent and a full-time working mother. But yeah, that's it for me.
Brilliant, thank you. And I was just really interested in this career journey point as well. Ellen and Amy, you sort of touched on it and how you got into the industry, in particular, Amy. Lucy, I'd love to hear from you how you sort of got to where you are today and how you first started getting interested in investing.
Thanks. Yeah, I actually was thinking about this morning because not sure if the audience will identify with this, but you guys might. I remember doing a quiz in year 9 when we were choosing our GCSEs, and actually one of the jobs that came out that was suitable for me was pension fund manager. And I told my father, who works in the city in a slightly unrelated area, but he thought that'd be an excellent idea. So obviously I just kind of deleted all memory of that for a few years because I thought, well, if my dad thinks it's a good idea, then what does he know? But I chose my GCSEs and A levels, and I did quite mathematical subjects. I'd say I did maths, further maths, physics, and history, and I then went on to study economics at Durham. And I guess fast forward to then, and I essentially realised in my second year of university that I really ought to get a decent summer job, and getting an internship would be a good way to improve my student balance sheet and hopefully set me up for the workplace. And that's when I think I really kind of thought it more seriously about what kind of jobs in finance were available. And back then there wasn't too much information as to what the different jobs were. So I just kind of applied for as much as I possibly could, essentially. And I was quite lucky because the one job I did get was to go and work for 8 weeks with an organization called Merrill Lynch Investment Managers. And I just loved it. It was so interesting. And I sat in their macro strategy multi-asset funds team. And I did an investment challenge, a stock challenge, a bit like the ones that Gain runs, actually. And I think the thing I learned from that whole experience was that fund management was definitely going to be the career for me, and I really wanted to make that happen. But also, the macro side probably wasn't where I wanted to be. I wanted to be looking at the companies, so I made a request. I got a graduate job offer and made a request to join one of their equity teams. And so yeah, I joined the graduate scheme at what was then BlackRock because they bought the company. And I worked there, joined their UK small companies team. And I guess I've never looked back from that because I found there that was, it satisfied my kind of curiosity to the world, companies, why companies are successful, why shares move around. And yeah, I kind of been a small mid-cap specialist ever since working at big companies like BlackRock. I've worked at a small boutique hedge fund, and now I'm kind of somewhere in the middle at a medium-sized company, and that works quite well for me. I like that dynamic. So that's been the journey.
That's great, and that's really interesting. You worked out what you enjoyed and what you didn't enjoy, and you just pivoted more towards the former as you went on. I think that's really helpful. And Ellen, I imagine you've had a similar sort of decision-making process, as you've obviously done a huge amount of different and varied things. How did you decide, okay, actually this is the switch I want to make? What were the things that particularly inspired you and sort of you enjoyed as you went through, and clearly gained this huge breadth of experience?
Yeah, I mean, I loved investing in general. I already studied finance and investments when I was in university, but I tend to graduate and go into education every time when the market falls over. So when I came out of university, the internet bubble had burst, so nobody could hire people in private equity or asset management, except for maybe some interns that they were rotating. So I had to find another way to stay close to the financial markets, but find a way back later on. So that's how I did my rooting, from financial markets to then the lobbyists, and then working with the banks closely, doing a good job for them and convincing them to give me a shot on the private equity financing side. So that's how I became a financial sponsors bankers. And then I decided, okay, 2008 was coming, let's do an MBA, because I really enjoyed what I was doing, but I knew it wasn't going to last, because suddenly instead of 3 a.m. in the morning, I could go home at 8 p.m. And I was like, that means that we're all going to go away. So what I did was go to INSEAD, do my MBA. And when I came out, it was still 2009. So the market hadn't come back. So what I did was find a project while I was looking for a job. So for that, I set up a company. Then I found a job I really liked, but was in a location I didn't want, because I was working on secondaries, super interesting, where you buy private equity portfolios from people, put a valuation on them, and then try to find a return by investing in those. And I really enjoyed that, but I wanted to come back to London. I still had this company, which was dormant, but I resurfaced it. And then I found a project, and somehow it kept rolling. And I kept seeing all these interesting projects with different private equity funds and venture capital. And I loved the diversity. And somehow that became my company. And that ran for more than 10 years when I went in-house into Capital Dynamics to do some co-investment work. And now I'm back to running my own company. So yeah.
Great, huge amount of tenacity and entrepreneurialism. And would you say, I'm interested, everyone's answer to this, but in terms of the types of skills you need to do what you do, I mean, from my experience, you need a huge amount of resilience to be in this job, because things can go against you. You make mistakes as part of the day-to-day, because you've got to, our job is effectively predicting the future. But yeah, what kind of skills, and maybe Ellen, I'll just ask you briefly first, what skills do you think have got you to where you are?
Yeah, I mean, as you said, very entrepreneurial and very driven. I'm very tenacious. When I know what I want, I keep focusing, and I am willing, though, to be flexible, because sometimes you have to make a choice. Like, do I want to sit around and wait, or do I do something else that gets me close to it while I'll still keep networking? So your network also, when you look for a job, is super important. Always be out there, know the people in the businesses that you like, and make sure that you stay in contact with them so they can be your clients, or that you can find a job with them, and that you also know what's going on in the market. I think that's always really important, that you stay relevant and everybody knows that you know what's going on in the market. But yeah, technical skills have helped a lot. You need to be strategic. You need to have insights. You need to really be able to analyze companies. I think that's one of the most important points. And that's not just financial, Excel skills, especially when you're junior, are super relevant, because what you need to do is build a lot of scenarios as well. because what you need to do is think through what can happen in a company, what will impact its valuation. And for doing that, you will need some of the financial building skills, but also a lot of like strategy and understanding markets and products and customers. And so you need to have a really broad view, I would say. And I think that's helped me a lot.
Yeah, I think that's great. And I always say this to our investors, like the numbers in the spreadsheet, they're just the outputs. As you say, it's the inputs that drive them, which are much more qualitative, whether it's the, quality of the management team, the product, the runway for growth of that particular industry. Victoria, I'd love to hear from you, because I know you mentioned, obviously your role is provides a really different angle on this, because you are more involved in the fundraising, which is a critical part. None of us would exist without the capital of our investors that we look after. So love to hear from you what sort of skills you need and those that have got you to where you are now.
Sure, absolutely. So yes, so on the fundraising side, just to sort of explain to the audience, obviously there's the investing side, and then there are the people who are going to be investing. So most companies will have a team of people who are out there bringing that money in, which is part of what I do. So quite clearly, one of the most important skills there, which is probably as far from a spreadsheet as you can get, is the ability to build relationships. So there is still the need, as Ellen said there, you've got to know what's going on in the market. You've got to be able to succinctly translate it. You've got to embody your firm, your company, how we do things, how we talk about it, and convey that message positively to your target audience. So that ability to build relationships is a really, really strong skill to have inside of what I do. Alongside that, obviously, is a lot of attention to detail. You're meeting a lot of people all of the time. I think it's a really key thing to be able to recall pieces of information, remember conversations that you had with them before. So, being able to have a system where you yourself know how, when you last had a conversation with them and what you spoke about, and all of these sort of little skills really come across as sort of make you polished and somebody that they would remember. I think, the communication side of things, I think, is very important as well. There's obviously, as I mentioned there, communicating yourself and conveying yourself to your clients, but then there's also that flipped back as well. So part of what I do is, clients are constantly feeding back what their thoughts about investment, what sort of things are they looking at, what areas of the market are they nervous about, where are they investing, where are they not investing. So it's really important that we feed that back into our product development teams, so that our firms know what are people out there thinking about. So there's a sort of a communication to your clients, but there's also communication back inside internally as well. And I think that, as a sort of slightly more humorous point that I wish I'd known earlier in my career, is there is an element of thick skin that you need in this sort of job. I'm sure there is everywhere, but it is try not to take things too personally. You do get ignored quite a lot, especially early on in your career, and it can be very disheartening. But it's not personal, and I think, as Ellen was saying there, tenacity, persevering, the ability to be able to sort of bounce back up, brush yourself off and move on is something, if you can try and harness that early on, you will hold on to it for life.
Great, thank you. And I'm also very aware now how lucky we are to have a breadth across. We always say as Gain, our job is to get more women into investment decision-making roles and investment roles more generally. But here we have representatives from not only public markets, where I also work and where Lucy works, but private equity and venture, which is the sort of early stage where Amy comes in. So we're really covering the full spectrum. And Amy, I'm aware in venture, the R element can be particularly relevant because you are judging companies that, I don't know if they're pre-revenue, but they're certainly at very early stages, and the people that are running those businesses matter a lot, as well as things that Ellen's talked about in terms of product, the markets they operate in. So love to hear kind of maybe a bit of a day in the life of yours, Amy, and what skills you're using on a daily basis.
Yeah, of course. I love that the answers from Ellen and Victoria, where you know, the network and the relationship building is such an important aspect. Because when I first started a venture, I heard in our team we used to joke that venture capital is really social capital, where it's, yes, you have the, you know, you need to find the investment and the right deals, but it's also building that relationship with the founder and the team, and like, you know, how do we build the right board management around a particular founder if there's a particular strategy that you want to execute. So really that social capital kind of terminology stayed with me for my career. And in terms of your question of Charlotte about looking at founders and looking at entrepreneurs, it is definitely tricky. There is no framework to tell you, oh, just because of somebody has exited a company before, that this one is definitely going to be another success, or they were part of $1 billion startup once upon a time and they know the recipe of doing it again. Because I think there is so many other dynamics that you need to think about, in particular in early stage investing, and that's where I sit right now. So we're talking seed, Series A. So a lot of the times it might actually be, you know, an entrepreneur with a pitch idea, you know, 50-page slide deck in a data room, and you really have to imagine the future with them, see their vision, and understand the assumptions that went into why they think that the future should be built the way that they're proposing. And I think what comes, you know, like I said, there's no framework for it. And what really comes to help you make a decision of your investing at the end of the day is that journey that you go through in terms of evaluating that company. So really, I'm talking about the due diligence aspect. As you're asking questions about the technology, the market, the commercials, the financials, etc. How does this founder or entrepreneur answer the question? How do they, you know, how do they support you in finding that answer and building that conviction? And during this process, it could be a 2 months, 2 weeks kind of affair. And that really helps you evaluate whether you can work with this person. Because ultimately, again, we're in venture capital's early stage. So you really have to believe that I can work with this team, and our firm can be a value add to the company and how and to the business.
Great, thank you. And I think this provides a really good segue into our next section, which is going to be more conceptually about how each of you invest, or your teams invest, and what sorts of inputs are important. We mentioned spreadsheets, but there's clearly a lot of, as you mentioned, Amy, due diligence, which goes far beyond that. So maybe Lucy, and I'll be really interested in your team in particular. You're obviously dealing at the more micro, small cap end of, and this is sort of small companies end of what are still public markets, so their prices on the screen, and they're changing every day. And I think most subscribers to Gain will be aware that just because a price moves doesn't necessarily mean that the value has moved, but it's a lot of it's behavioral. So I'm just interested in maybe if you could describe how you go about investing. If you have an example to bring it to life in an investment that you've made, fantastic. But what's your sort of approach and framework to what makes a good investment, and then how you go about making that decision and then holding the investment as well?
Sure. So I guess the first thing to say is that we're very much what you would characterize as bottom-up investors. So our fund looks at each company, each investment opportunity on its own merit, and would do a kind of research process. You know, it's not dissimilar to what Amy was talking about, although as a public market investor, you don't have quite the same level of information in terms of that due diligence process as a private investor would have. So we're looking at what the company's telling us essentially around its disclosures in its annual report, and then we're comparing that to what we know about the market it's operating in, what we can glean from analysts, what we can glean from news sources, and what we can glean from our own experience. So, you know, there are some sectors where you can build up a knowledge over time, and I've certainly done that in a few sectors over the last few years. But yeah, I think maybe one slight difference with dealing with public markets, going to what you're saying, Charles, about the share prices, is it's not just enough to work out kind of what the company's doing, how it makes money, what its competitive advantages are there barriers to entry, are the management good? That's obviously all essential, but then you then have to work out well, what's already priced into this security? What's the market already expecting for this company to achieve? And yeah, that's, I think, a part where yeah, that the art really comes into its own, because you're being asked as an investor to judge sentiment. And you can find a fantastic company, but if you buy it at a 20-year high and the shares never go up in value and potentially go down, it's not going to be a good investment, unfortunately, for your clients. And so it doesn't really matter that you found the most fantastic company ever. And equally, you can invest in companies where maybe not everything's quite there, but actually, there's been a change in management because the previous management weren't doing a good job, and there's an opportunity, for that sentiment, which is very negative about the company, to become more positive. And those are those kind of opportunities. I always think you make your most money in I guess in the short term, where you get a company which can do well, but also where you can have a correction in terms of how the market's assessing the company. And that, because that can change quite quickly, much more quickly than the company itself can change, which is a slow process. So yeah, that's kind of our approach. And I guess we do overlay that with what we think about certain industries. So we might have an opinion over whether an industry might become more or less competitive, for example, or whether an industry might change or be impacted by technology. Actually, one of the examples I thought I would mention was, how do you know when a company that you thought you understood, you get information on which kind of renders that that prior conclusion invalid? And that's, I think, for me, those moments when you kind of you have to use your judgment most acutely and most directly. And one of those examples, a company that actually hasn't. It was initially very successful for us on the fund, and then essentially had a profit warning. And it was a company which was providing video conferencing services, and had a profit warning. And the company came out and said, well, we said a lot of our customers are lawyers, and that deal flow is just down a bit. And we thought, well, the thing is, we've just heard about this company called Zoom, which is offering your service for free over the internet. Essentially, and so we kind of just thought this doesn't really make sense. And to take that information and make that call, we just kind of thought, well, we just don't think that they're telling us the entire truth, or maybe they don't know it themselves. And so yeah, making a decision to kind of say, yes, we previously had this conclusion, we now have new information. It's partial information, but we're going to make a decision to sell. And we sold after that first profit warning. And that was a good decision in hindsight to get out, because actually, obviously we're recording a conference call on Zoom right now, and it's just transformed the way we work. And that company's been a victim, and so being able to see those changes and have the bravery, I guess, just to say something's going to change, and unfortunately this company's not going to succeed. That's just as important as being able to pick a company and saying this is a fantastic company and we want it in the portfolio, to me, because you've got to make sure that you keep that kind of rigor of and keep that kind of, make sure your portfolio is current. Would you buy your portfolio again today is always a good question to ask. Yeah, so that's kind of our approach and some of my thoughts on the kind of small cap investing, and yeah, how it's not really about spreadsheets at all when you kind of boil things down to it.
Yeah, there's no way that Zoom coming out from the left field was anywhere in anyone's spreadsheets four plus years ago.
We actually talked to the company about it, and they thought we were mad. But yeah,
really amazing. So and that's their own business, which is shows the sort of.
It's really hard to see. Yeah, it's really hard to see.
That's a great example. Thanks, Lucy. And I think that flexibility that your team showed as well to take on new information, make a quick decision, clearly that's highly relevant, and the ability to go against the grain. I think that dispassionate response to what everyone else is thinking is that's very well illustrated by that. Thank you. Ellen, I'm really interested because you mentioned your sort of love of companies and looking at companies, and obviously this is Lucy working in public markets which are listed, which are on sort of able to see prices daily. You're in private equity. So it's a slightly different part of investing, but really interested in how you approach it when you're analysing something, and ultimately the importance of art versus science in all of that.
Yes, so I mean, we actually look at a lot of the same things that Lucy does as well. But we have our information in different formats. For example, when you look at a company, we have a lot more access to like what kind of contracts do they have in their portfolio, and really we can see their pipeline, and or we ask for it. So to be honest, to start, you get like a little bit of information, and then you give an indication. For example, if you do a direct investment, we want to offer a certain price for this company, and you do that on a little bit of information that you've received and analyzed. And then if the company agrees that you're one of the parties that goes through, you get a lot of confidential information. So you sign NDAs for that. You get private information that other people will never get to see, and that you also can't share with others. And then you really start digging. So you look at everything the company has, like their contracts, if they have a factory, have they kept their machines in good condition? If they have products, are they still in a good state? Can we sell them? Do they have too much stock? What kind of customers do they have? Are the customers happy with the products? How are they compared to their competitors? Are they in a good position, in a bad position? And as Lucy also said, we look a lot at like, what can we buy the company for, and what can happen to it? Like, how can it improve? Because a lot of what we do is buy it at the right price, but see how we can create value. So also as a private equity fund, when you go in, what can you do with a company? Because if you already have a company with the best margins and the best of this and the best of that, sometimes you can't do that much work anymore, so you can't create that much value. So sometimes it's better, as Lucy also mentioned, to buy a company that's maybe not in top form, but that has a good reputation and that could improve. So where you can say like, oh, maybe they can raise their prices a little bit and can gain some money with that. Maybe we can put a new CEO in who is better at seeing how the market works and steering this company. Maybe we can internationalize the company. What you have as well is sometimes you go into a company that's very specialized, very good in the UK, and then you go in as an investor with international relationships, and you say like, hey, what we can do is bring this company abroad. And then you help them get into like France or get into Spain. And then suddenly this company has a much bigger market, and in that sense can increase its value. So what we really do is go into the company, find all the risk factors, but also find all the positives, and then also look at what can we do to improve this company. So not just where is it now, but where can we make it go by doing our own work, by really helping them, by pushing them. And then you can also, when you're in the company, when you've actually done the acquisition, you sit on the board and you help them with some of the decisions they make. So you kind of keep that overview. So you're always involved and you try to add value, and then you want to sell it at the right price. But even when you go into a company, you look at like, what do we buy it for? And who might be the buyer later? Sometimes you even make a company go in a certain direction so that you know who could buy the company at the right price. And that's not that you do your spreadsheets, but it's more you make it suitable for like a large acquirer or for somebody in the industry who needs a company that fills a certain gap. And then you can position yourself in the right way to sell it at the right price. And I'm sure Victoria knows a lot about that as well.
Yeah, fascinating. There's a huge amount of creativity and imagination in there. You're not just looking at what a company looks like today, but you've got to have that wider lens to see the potential. And interested, and I'll come on to Victoria's answer on this as well, but would you describe clearly in private equity, there's a real element of management as well. You're taking roles on boards, you're involved with the strategy, just interested in that context on the background of maybe some of your team members as well. Do people tend to come in from other areas which aren't investment related and come into private equity, perhaps from a consultancy or from an industry, working for a company itself, from that sort of background?
Yeah, absolutely. So especially at like the associate and a little bit more senior levels, you see that a lot of people can come in from like the BCGs or the McKinseys, because what we have right now is something that's been a trend in the last years that's gotten more and more important, is that certain funds have operating partners. And these are not the people that necessarily buy the company. We involve them when we do, but they are the ones who really go in and make those changes within the company. And their job is to go into the company, find the things that they need to improve and work on those. And for that, strategy consultants, for example, can be relevant, or very good industry experts. So especially around technology, a lot of companies are digitizing. So people have been hired from like Facebook and from other tech companies to really help a company improve their technology, improve the way they function in the market, improve the way they approach customers. So you can come in from different directions, but you need to have a specific skill that you're really good at, and then put that role into action into improving a company.
Great, fascinating. Victoria, really interested in how Maven approaches this in terms of, is there that similar involvement in terms of inputting into the strategy of the companies that you invest in?
Yes, so I've just, has my screen gone purple for anyone else?
You have gone purple, but we can hear you very clearly. So
I'm just going to
not
turn it
phased
off,
by the
turn it
purple.
back on again.
Adds
Sorry,
a bit of
I
creativity
apologize.
and colour.
That's not the first time it's happened today. Question, approach to investing. Yes, sorry. So Maven, and actually, as you know, nodding along with what Ellen was saying there, it's a really interesting point, particularly on the science versus art side of things. So our approach as an investor is a very national one. So we have a region of offices, 11 offices around the UK, and although we are generalists overall, we are although we're generalists overall, we actually have a that makes it sort of quite complicated in terms of deciding which companies you're going to buy, because there isn't any particular angle. So I think that's where the strength of the regional approach to investing really comes in. Our investment directors in sort of particular pockets of the country know that area particularly well and know that market particularly well. So corporate finance parties in that area, companies in the lower mid-market in that area. So it's really a case of, again, going back to the relationships and getting to know those fields. And I think in terms of the approach of expertise, it's an interesting point there as well. So for our VCTs, so these are venture capitalist trusts, so much earlier stage investments than sort of more traditional private equity. So we're sort of looking to invest, say, up to 5 million in a company. I mean, we probably wouldn't invest that much, but sort of say 2 to 3 million in a company on a first round. And invariably, companies at that stage, in this day and age, there's a lot of tech in these types of businesses. So even as a generalist, even if you're not focused particularly on deep tech comes into everything nowadays. So we've been appointing specialists sort of in the tech industry as sort of not necessarily consultants, but investment managers who specify in tech businesses across our whole range of offices around the UK, so that you've got that level of expertise on hand. Just because it's you know, even if it isn't a tech business, it is it is just at present in everything, particularly early stage growth orientated businesses at the moment.
Great, thank you. And yeah, it just comes back to that point of you sort of need to be a jack of all trades as an investor, whether it's understanding the threat from Zoom or whether it's just looking kind of outside the box at what's changing in each industry. I think most people here are generalists, but you've touched on something as well, which I'm going to ask Amy about, which is this sort of early stage aspect to investing. And I would say, Amy, you are amongst us, maybe perhaps the most specialist, I would argue, with your neuroscience PhD. But I also am aware that in venture, and this is kind of getting into the art, not science, and you can't get 100% in this exam aspect, there are mistakes that we all make every day when we're investing. It's the nature of this job, and particularly in venture, most companies do not do not go to unicorn status of being worth over $1 billion. A lot of companies fail. The majority of companies do. And so interested in how you deal with that as a sort of part of what you do. You know, clearly you're very academic, very accomplished, you're probably not used to failing at all. But how you sort of incorporated that as just part of the job, and you know how you move on from mistakes and learn from them.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of elements there that I can address. But firstly, I think approach to investing in early stage. I think our team likes to think about it from first principles point of view, simply because of how early it is. First principles, as in like, what is the problem this technology is supposed to be solving? So, for example, it's really fashionable these days to have software in surgical rooms, but are surgeons asking for a technology like this? Or like, for Zoom, did we need something like this? How is it going to make the world better? How does it make work better? How does it make the users more effective or more productive at their work? So a lot of it does start with that vision of like, first principles, what is the problem you're trying to solve? Is this the best technology to solve it? And is technology the kind of the right way? And how can we grow this company? Because this ties back to what Ellen was saying in terms of like, we're kind of passing the baton on to somebody else at the end of our investment cycle, let's say, because ultimately we are looking for exit partners, whether that's PE firms or the public markets or other buyers, where we want to grow the company to a certain level with certain parameters, whether that's a revenue target, whether that's a customer base, or whether that's just a quote unquote proof of concept, because we want to know that we want to validate that there is an unmet need, there is a problem here. We want to make conviction that this solution is the best solution to solve this problem, and that we have belief we can grow this company to the next stage for successive investors along this this value chain. And so that's kind of the general framework that we use to try to understand a particular opportunity. But Charlotte, what you were asking in terms of like, a lot of companies do fail, particularly at this early stage. I think the statistics somewhere like a lot of VC funds make the returns only on 20% of their portfolio, which say the other 80% is basically learning experiences. I like to think that they're not really failures per se. I think there was an assumption in that particular case where we can revisit or kind of learn from. And so if we're making a bet on the 20% that is making the fund, how do we create a portfolio to kind of balance the risk between the ones that we know will succeed? Know is a strong word here, but have a high likelihood of success versus a really cool technology with a big unmet need. And I think the way I think about art versus science in here, yes, of course, the content is a lot of science, but everything in structuring the deal, structuring the portfolio is very artistic, because you're looking at different ways to balance risk and mitigation and the companies and etc. So hopefully that answers the question a little bit.
Yeah, it does. And I guess it comes back to this, how do you think about risk? And risk is the outcome of so many different things that you're contending with. And a lot of it comes back to what we're discussing, which is backing good people, backing something that makes sense. A lot of this is, as you said, common sense. Do doctors really have the propensity to change the way that they practice and therefore use this new product? And I think if you're being very textbook about the whole thing, you forget about the human element, which often can be the downfall of investors. Yes, in theory this works, but in practice it doesn't. So yeah, that was really helpful. Thank you. Lucy, I know we talked about this before the call as well in terms of thinking about risk, a lot of which is sort of quantifiable after the event. But just interested in how you think about it. What is risk, and is that something that you touched on human behavior and markets being irrational? Is it something that is perhaps more art than is widely appreciated, more artistic than scientific?
Yeah, I think so. And I remember my memories jogged by Amy's comment. I remember having a meeting with my first boss when I started as an analyst at BlackRock, and I had a background at doing well at school and at university, and he sat me down and he said, look, the key to being a good fund manager is you've got to get pretty much 60% of decisions right. And I remember thinking, that sounds really bad. like I want to get 100% of decisions right. Like that's just kind of how you're wired through the the academic process that you go through as a student at school and then at university. And that's I think that's just so important when it comes to risk, is acknowledging that you can't know everything, acknowledging that you make decisions based on the information you had at the time, and if that information does change, you have to reassess. You got no other option, and also that you can trust people, but they may not really deserve it, and that's something that I think that's probably one of the lessons that's been the longest to learn, because it requires the most experience, is to when someone's telling you what they're trying to do or why something's happened, even if it's just a CEO explaining why something has gone wrong, you've got to that cynicism, you've got to say, okay, well, what's actually going on here? You're drilling down into that, and so there is a quantitative approach to risk for sure, and those I wouldn't want to invalidate that. I think the quantitative risk tools available to fund managers are super useful, and you can look at a stock and you can look at share price movement over 5 years, and someone can tell you this. If the market goes up 20%, your stock's going to go up 25% based on its historical beta. But those are all historical. And so what happens in the market is these relationships hold, the statistical relationships hold, and then till suddenly sometimes they don't. And those are the parts where it's that's the art to work out where are there risks which are currently not captured in those statistical models, that we need to be aware of and we need to factor in, and is that risk a stock specific risk? So do we deal with that through diversification, for example, or is it a market risk, and do we need to have high cash balances in our portfolio, for example, to counteract the fact that we think that in general valuations are potentially overextended, or is other factors such as balance sheet risk, do companies need to be recapitalized, and that can be very painful as a shareholder, especially in small companies. So you have to really be active in terms of all those things. But I think you then have to remember that when you're running a fund, are you meeting your investors' kind of objectives? And the most basic financial theory says that you have to take risk in order to get return. So risk is just it's a fundamental part of being an analyst and a fund manager. You kind of have to get comfortable with that. And I think another part of the art of being a fund manager is learning how to manage your own reaction to risk events, and that emotional side. And I've got to remember that making stock recommendations as a young analyst that didn't go right. I quickly forgot that 60%, the 60-40 rule. I really beat myself up and I felt absolutely terrible. But you kind of just have to keep going, and you just have to take it as the learning experience that it is. And over time, unfortunately they still happen. But you certainly feel you're able to take it slightly less personally. I guess as you do this job for longer. But the fact that the market is always changing, risks are always changing, and companies are always changing. That's actually what makes the job so good. There's nothing repetitive about it, and so yes, risk is here, and we have to work with it. But it's why we're all here as well. And I think that is it is fascinating in terms of how that kind of translates back into the returns that we're delivering for our investors, essentially.
Yeah, and it sounds from what you said, it's also there's a big part of common sense here, which is that if a company has too much debt, or you mentioned balance sheet, then you might lose your money. And it's sort of thinking about risk in those terms in relation to what the client needs. And quite often, I think it was a really good Economist article at the weekend which talked about risk in terms of volatility, not necessarily meaning that you're going to get more by way of return, but actually if you can kind of think about risk in that slightly less statistical framework, but actually, okay, is this a good idea? Is this company going to be around in 10 years' time? Then I think you've really sort of hit the nail on the head with that, is that you've got to apply that common sense, but also be aware that things will come out of nowhere, and you cannot anticipate that, and you've got to have the resilience to take the punches. Thank you so much. And I think the last element of this panel, we wanted just to give some practical advice to particularly anyone who is considering this, who perhaps thought, okay, well, I don't have the correct degree, or I don't have the skill set that is sort of stereotypically associated with investing. We want to just give that sort of extra insight into what interviewers are looking for. And I'm going to ask Ellen first, because you run your own company, and therefore you probably have a very clear idea of what you're looking for. So love to hear it. Thanks.
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the most important elements is that somebody can think things through. And I think interviewers will do that. And if I interview someone, it's something I really ask about. So I might ask you even about what did you do in your dissertation, and how did you think through this problem, and why did you solve it in this way, or look it up and produce this results. And I think that's really important, that in the interviews you show how you produce a result and not like what the result is. Because sometimes an answer 5 is right, but 6 or 7 could also be good. So the more important question is like, how do you do it? And I think when you're young and you want to get in, I do say like some technical skills are helpful. So if you can take an Excel course, if you don't come from that like finance background and you haven't had it in university, it will just help you be quicker. And it's nice that you don't feel like you have this behind your colleagues that might have had that in school. But that's what you need. You just want some of those skills that you can use and put to work, but most of it is your brain. So whatever your background is, you should be able to think through companies, through cases, and be a networker. Because maybe not in your first years do you have to go out to clients, but if you want to grow in your role and you want to become a senior, you will have to be able to talk to people, to convince them, to get information out of them, and to negotiate transactions. So those are skills that get more and more important the more senior you get, but please make sure that you have them and try to cultivate them by even going to some like junior networking events just to get that in gear.
Great, that's great to hear some of the soft skills as well. Amy, in venture capital, what are people looking for generally?
I think the first thing is, don't let anybody tell you that your degree is not relevant to a particular area or field. I mean, you see career pivots all the time, and like you know, obviously from a personal story as well, like coming from strictly in some ways academia and moving into industries. It's you just have to demonstrate that your ability to think, like Ellen was saying, and being able to kind of take somebody from how do you think about a problem, take them through how you work it out and what the conclusion looks like, and being able to explain that and communicate that at all different levels, at a super technical level versus a very high level. I think these are the skills that really transfer from one place to another. And I think for our team specifically, or like not our team, but in venture capital, I think like I said, social capital is pretty big in this industry. Getting out there, seeing what are the companies, what are the concepts that people are really excited about, what is the technology of the future, and why do we think that it's the technology of the future, and being able to get all these different opinions and synthesize your own conviction. I think that's incredibly important. And I think you know, being able to demonstrating that you have this love of learning, because like Lucy was saying, like you have these strong you know, you have these strong pressures from different markets, or like different competitive pressures that you might not know. You have to be quite agile in the way you think, in terms of like, you have a very strong conviction right now based on the information you have, but the minute that a new information comes through, you have to be willing to let go of your conviction and adopt a new, potentially new conclusion, a potentially new outcome. So being able to show that you love learning and being able to read through a lot of these reports and come to that conclusion, I think it's incredibly invaluable. And regardless of what background you come from, being able to show that that love of learning, love of reading, synthesizing information, I think that's really critical.
Great, thanks. That's a great answer. Thank you. So just to finish off, we always like to ask people what advice they would give their younger self. So maybe starting with you, Victoria, be really interested to hear what you would say to yourself when you were at the start of your career?
There's so much, we'd need another hour. But if I had to pick one, I think, and I think it's come across from everybody on the panel today, the fact that actually none of us have had a purely linear career. And I think my advice to myself would be, and it's very hard when you're young, but try not to catastrophize everything. I think, you know, what often feels like the end of the world in your career, or, you know, something that hasn't gone your way can actually become an opportunity and lead you onto something much better. And it's the ability to see the positivity and move on. And actually in my career path, that has opened some extraordinary doors. And it's something I wish I'd embraced a little bit earlier on, that way of thinking. And I think on the same thread as well, I think it's to create your own style and carve your own path, and not, you know, particularly when you're working, and very often you do earlier on in your career in a big team, and you want to sort of, you know, do everything the same as everybody else. And I think having, particularly in my type of role, which is very personal and relationship based, sort of having your own natural style and being yourself comes through, you know, makes you come across as being genuine, and I think it's better to be authentic. That and then yeah, I mean, nothing good happens after 2 a.m. I think would be the final one. Never.
Love that. Thanks, Victoria. Lucy, what would you say to your younger self?
Yeah, I guess 100% echo all of that great advice. I would have done well to have heard it. I think for me, it's just about having confidence in yourself. And then what does that actually mean in practice is, when you've done the work, don't be afraid to tell senior people your conclusions. You know, that when you meet people, don't be afraid to ask someone for a one-on-one meeting to learn about their career, so you can build on that. You basically don't be shy. You don't automatically assume that someone that seems confident actually has all the answers, and your answers are not as important because you're less confident about them. So I think it's just, yeah, really believe in yourself, believe in the work you've done, and understand that, you know, people are generally happy to help you. So just ask for help, ask for that insight, and don't be shy. Just go for it, basically.
Great, thank you. Great answer. Amy, what would you say?
I would say I would love to have a pep talk with Lucy and Victoria before any deal I walk into at this point. But I think I think everything that was mentioned kind of resonates. You know, I'm talking about imposter syndrome, talking about you know, feeling like you might not belong in a particular place just because you don't have the background. But I think I would tell myself to seek mentorship earlier, because I think being able to talk to somebody about what their career journey looks like is a one form of inspiration that you can take, especially when you're quite, quote unquote, lost in your in what you want to do and what you want to what kind of career you want to build. And I think you know, part of what I think about inspiration is, like, if you're able to see yourself in somebody else, and who is just a couple of years ahead of you, or maybe a few years ahead of you, that you can see more tangibly how they took one step after another to kind of get to where they are. I mean, Rome wasn't made overnight, so it's going to take a lot of time. And the more information and the more people that you talk to, you're able to kind of figure out, you know, what elements resonates with you, what are you good at, maybe, and find environments that you will thrive in without changing who you are and, you know, pretending to be in a different kind of persona.
Great advice, and very on brand for Gain, where we're trying to provide role models like the four of you have been today. So thanks so much. I think, yeah, if you can't see it, you can't be it. Ellen, what would you have given to yourself as advice when you were younger?
Yeah, Amy just touched on it. I wish I had more mentors. Like, I was inspired by my grandfather when I started my career, because he was on the board of directors of companies, and he used to tell me about how he introduced a barcode and all these things. And I was super fascinated, and I was like, I want to go into economics like he did. And then via that route ended up in private equity. But earlier on in my career, mentoring wasn't like it is now, where you have GAIN and Level 20 and all these organizations that give young women mentors. And it was quite a uphill battle sometimes, especially as a woman, to get somewhere. So I would tell everyone, if you can find mentors in your industry, absolutely use them, and make sure that they help you and talk through things, because everybody has things in their career that are not going as planned. And then it's really nice to have some like sounding board and somebody who can help you and give you some good advice.
Brilliant. Thank you so much. Very, very good advice from everyone. And just thank you to all of you for dialing into this, and to our panelists for providing what I found a really exciting discussion. And I hope that everyone has found it as helpful as I have. So thank you so much to everyone. And please do follow GAIN, gainuk.org, for any future events. We look forward to seeing you soon.